Hey, y'all, and welcome back to the podcast. So for this next episode that you're about to listen to, we interviewed Pete Hellwig, one of the co-founders of Atmos Financial, which is a company that provides consumers with climate-positive banking solutions as a way to avoid big status quo banks. The topic of the podcast is the impact of where you bank. But here's the thing. Since we recorded this podcast, a lot has happened in the world of banking. In March, in part due to rising interest rates because of inflation, a regional and startup-focused bank called Silicon Valley Bank collapsed and was seized by regulators after there was a run on the bank. This marked the second largest bank failure in U.S. history, and subsequently other banks failed as well, giving this ripple of impact that Silicon Valley Bank had on the wider tech and startup community, as well as the wider banking community. We felt it wouldn't be right to play this podcast episode as is without addressing any of the recent happenings in the space. So although we recorded this before SVB failed, if you stay until the end of the podcast, we asked Pete to send in an updated answer to discuss how companies like his that provide non-traditional banking solutions for consumers who want to be mindful of their impact on the planet have been impacted, if at all, by this latest news. So make sure to listen until the end to get his take on recent news. Welcome back to the Cluey Podcast, where we help conscious consumers like you get clued into the latest conscious tips, topics, and brands from impact-driven founders to experts and thought leaders on the topic at hand. I'm your host, Maryclaire, founder of Cluey. Let's get Cluey'd in. Today's topic, the impact of where you bank. To discuss this, our guest today is Peter Hellwig, co-founder at Atmos Financial, which provides climate-positive banking. Peter, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Tell me a little bit more about yourself, how you got started and why you wanted to start something like Atmos Financial, and what's ultimately the goal of Atmos?
Yeah, great questions. Atmos is designed to give people advocacy and the possibility of taking action with their money. In general, this just is not possible in the world of banking that we have. And it's something that's been near and dear to my heart for quite some time. I've been in banking for about 20 years and have worked for some of the largest banks in the world and some of the smallest B Corp banks of the world. And have noticed where all of the problems and skeletons lie, and have wanted to create a company that helps facilitate and fix those issues.
That's amazing. And, I'm very curious to understand, based on that experience that you have, how it is that Atmos is ultimately different than a traditional bank that someone may, keep their money in a savings account or something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, traditional banks take all of the depositors' money and they invest in a portfolio of loans. They might be commercial mortgages for buildings. It might be home mortgages, loans to businesses, to people, all sorts of things. They might invest in treasuries. And all of this is well and fine, but it doesn't necessarily have any climate impact. And so what Atmos strives to do is take every dollar that a customer deposits with us and utilize those dollars to invest 100% of them into climate positive infrastructure. So every dollar that's with Atmos is used to facilitate good things in the world and create climate impact.
That's amazing. And, when you say that some of the other traditional models aren't having a climate impact, I mean, they probably are having a climate impact, but it might not necessarily be a climate positive impact. Would that be accurate to say that?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's exactly right. There are some banks that have, I would say, a really negative impact, and some of those are probably the larger banks that we all know in this country and around the world that have investments in fast fashion, fossil fuels, the production of plastics and machinery that's extracting raw materials out of the ground, et cetera. There's a ton of things that big banks do and invest in. And then in small banks, they tend to lean into community investing, which is wonderful. It might be mortgages for homes or small businesses, but it really does not have that positive climate impact. And so that's what makes Atmos very different. So I would say, on the spectrum of banks, there's the larger banks and banks that have a negative impact on climate. There's the smaller community banks that are great for community, but have no to potentially a negative impact on climate, those smaller. And then there's Atmos, which is climate positive.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for clarifying that. So, that really also gets into the meat of what we're talking about today, which is ultimately the impact of where you keep your money. And so tell us something that maybe about the banking industry's impact on the climate crisis. You've already touched on it a bit, but something that maybe the average consumer might not know.
One of the things that makes banks really interesting is that these are primary dollars in the market. So this is your money that's going out into the world and creating homes, buildings, computers, the desks that we sit at, the beds that we sleep in. These are our dollars out in the world creating products every day. So when we think of banking versus investments or things that we could do with the stock market, banking is really that like front line of defense. Or rather that front line of impact. And then markets, like stock markets, they have a secondary impact that comes into play. So what I always encourage people to think about when it comes to banking in the big financial world out there is that their dollars in a deposit account have immediate and direct impact far more than the rest of their investment portfolio.
I think that's a great point to bring up, because particularly actually from the lens that we talk about a lot of things is as a consumer. And I know that you were talking about an investment portfolio and, dollars just sitting in a bank account, but, we're often talking about the impact of where you're spending your dollar, to consume goods and services on a daily basis, whether you're buying from, your lunch or your meal from Chick-fil-A, or you're, deciding to purchase a shirt from Shein online, or whatever you may be doing, recognizing the impact of where your dollar is being spent for consumer goods and services. But I don't think a lot of consumers recognize then that impact also extends to their money literally just quote unquote sitting in a bank, because it's not just sitting in a bank, it's actually doing things.
It's not sitting there at all. It's leveraged many times over and out creating and supporting all the products that you talked about. And for Atmos, we have a theory of change. And so what we do is we create an opportunity for customers who spend consciously to earn cash back on that spend. So we offer up to 5% cash back on products that are made and designed eco-consciously. And then obviously the big impact is those dollars that are held in a savings or a checking account with Atmos have that direct climate positive impact because that money is being used to go out into the world and develop the residential solar and utility scale solar projects that are developing and creating clean energy. And then the third impact of Atmos is our donation element. So we have a number of nonprofit organizations on our platform that each of our customers or many of our customers support through their savings rate, and we try to incentivize that when we can too.
Got it. No, that's great and a really interesting model. I'm curious, given when you mentioned that people's dollars are leveraged many times over, I mean, that's ultimately how a bank or financial institution that provides banking services, that's how that business model ultimately operates. That money is essentially given to that institution to safeguard, but it can be used to grow and do other things in the meantime. Obviously, with big banks, we've talked a lot about fossil fuels, big banks that, investing in fossil fuels, or maybe that's where some of that money is being leveraged. Can a solution like Atmos actually outperform the ultimate, returns on what's happening in a business model, like with a larger, more status quo multinational bank?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on the context of outperform, but the rates that we offer our customers tend to be much, much higher than the rates that they might get through some of those larger institutions. So our savings rate is up to 2.4% right now.
Wow.
And the, a lot of that is because we leverage technology. We're not a traditional brick and mortar bank. You can't go in and meet a teller, but you can certainly call us and talk to us on video anytime, or call us on the phone or chat with us. So our models just tend to be a little bit more efficient. And so we're able to pass that through to the customer.
Okay. Well, let's say that somebody is able or not able, regardless of if they're able or not able to change their current banking solution, or they're not willing to, if somebody is currently banking with a standard large multinational bank, is there any way that they could ensure that their savings aren't going towards things like fossil fuels, or do they not really have a say in those types of day-to-day operations of where their money is going, if it's related to savings or checking accounts?
They have no say. There's a number of nonprofit organizations out there that are created and trying to lean on the boards of big banks around the world, trying to get them to lean into climate positive actions. Those nonprofit organizations have been hard at work for years, and I think they're starting to move the needle a little bit. But at the end of the day, customers have no say in what their deposit dollars do with a traditional bank, and that's where Atmos is very different. Is with certainty that every dollar is invested into renewable energy.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And, in addition then to what bank or where you bank, I should say, and where you're keeping your money, you touched on this a little bit earlier related to investing. A lot of folks with savings are also looking to invest and are interested in sustainable, an interest in sustainable investment ultimately is on the rise. So we actually, one of our data partners for Cluey is an organization called Sustainalytics. They're owned by Morningstar, and Morningstar just recently released a stat that said a record $20.6 billion was put into sustainable funds in the US in 2019. This is from, an older report, but it's recent reporting on how this is continuing to grow, nearly 4 times as the previous year. Do you see this as a trend that's sticking around in terms of investment and sustainable investment being on the rise?
It's only going to increase. I love hearing statistics like that because it shows that more and more people care about what their dollars are doing and want to contribute to big social problems out there in the world. So this is going to rise without a doubt. And I think the big question that lies before all of us and those that are very close to the industry is ensuring that all those funds that say they're sustainable actually are sustainable.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. You're touching on greenwashing, of course, or the potential for greenwashing. And we are quite familiar with that term here at Cluey as it relates to how maybe consumer goods organizations or organizations providing consumer goods or services might potentially greenwash customers. But what you're talking to is that there could potentially be greenwashing within funds that you might be investing in as well.
Yeah, it's greenwashing can be a really strong term, and I'm sure there's some of that out there too. It's just not necessarily a regulated industry right now in the ESG or SRI spaces. So I think a lot of different funds and businesses can claim they're doing a lot, and they probably are, but it doesn't necessarily meet the same criteria that you as an investor may have on what they're doing. So it's just a scale.
Yep. No, that's helpful clarification. Well, we really love to end our podcast with 2 very classic questions that we ask every guest. And so, Peter, given what you just talked about the space needing to be regulated more and all these positive trends that are going to stick around, the first question that we always end our podcast with is a glimmer of hope question. And that is, what is a particular innovation in the space that you're in that you're jazzed about right now?
Oh my goodness. I love all of the electrification and climate technology that's coming to the building spaces. The world around us, the world that we see, the buildings, the streets, how we light this world and how we get around in it. I think all of that there's incredible work coming out to reduce emissions and reduce the impact of the built world around us. And there's so many things that are coming out in the space now. There's a ton of investment going into it. So I think in the next 5 years, there'll be a ton of new products that are really, really exciting. And the goal is just how do we swap out the old and get in the new as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, that's super exciting. Well, that's great. And I guess I'll ask you one additional follow-up too. I mean, speaking of investing in banking in particular, are there, hopes for on the horizon of like further regulations that can allow things like picking certain projects that you might want to invest in, whether it's the types of projects that you were just discussing, to really have a clearer sense on what their impact is? Like, is there something in that vein that you could clue us into if something's on the horizon or something you're hopeful for at least?
There's some investing platforms out there that give people the opportunity to invest in specific projects. Now, that's not FDIC insured dollars like Atmos, like a bank would be, but it is a really interesting investment proposal for people if they want to select where their dollars are going. Now, of course, there's a risk return trade-off that people have to be aware of. I do think banking is starting to lean a little bit more into knowing exactly where your dollars are going or trying to influence that in any way we can. Just speaking personally, me as an individual, I want to know what my dollars are doing out there in the world. And that's one of the reasons why I started Atmos. And I think there are a lot of people out there that want the same thing. They want some more transparency. They want accountability from the institutions and the companies that they work with. And that's just a trend that's going to continue to increase.
That's awesome. Well, Peter, our last and final question we always end with is, if you are comfortable with it, is rapid fire naming 3 other brands. You mentioned that you guys have the cashback reward program for people choosing to purchase from responsibly operating companies. Are there 3 brands that you have in mind that you'd love to share with us and our listeners in terms of brands that you love, and what is it that they make?
Oh my goodness. I probably don't have like any one or 3 brands that immediately come to mind, but the things that I love so much are just shopping local. So the things that I think of are the companies that are at my local farmers market that I go to, and I buy produce, food. Of course, I buy all that with my Atmos bank card, but I clothing from those producers. I love supporting my local communities in any way I can. So that's certainly what comes to mind for me.
That's great. Well, that's certainly something that a lot of folks can take advantage of in their local communities as well. But Peter, thank you so much for coming on our podcast to get our followers clued in about the impact of where you bank.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into today's episode. As a disclaimer, Cluey has an affiliate relationship with Atmos Financial. We only enter into affiliate relationships with brands who score a B- or higher on both their people impacts and planet impacts on our rating system. Our ratings are aggregated from best-in-class third-party data, so Cluey cannot impact the ratings of these brands ourselves. If you'd like to learn more about Cluey, our top-rated brands, our ratings, and how we make money, you can find it all at clueyconsumer.com/about us. Come back next time to get Cluey'd into the latest in the world of conscious consumerism. Thanks again for listening to this episode. As we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, because it was recorded before some big incidents occurred in the world of banking, we've asked our guest to send in a quick update on how things are going in his world since the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. Take a listen to his answer on what impacts, if any, his company Atmos has experienced given recent news.
Atmos customers aren't impacted by Silicon Valley Bank and the fallout there at all. We've not used Silicon Valley Bank, though it does introduce the concept within the general banking community that people's deposits aren't necessarily doing what they think they're doing, which is really interesting. With Atmos, we partner with banks around the country to leverage their balance sheets and the deposits that we can raise in order to get more solar and climate positive infrastructure out there in the world. I think that our deposits are all FDIC insured up to $250,000. And we are in the process of changing some of the way in which we do banking to facilitate FDIC insurance many times larger than that number. We do want to give customers the utmost feeling of safety when they bank with Atmos, and they should feel when they bank with Atmos like they're banking with a Chase or a Wells Fargo, etc. Of course, we've not been around for that long, but in general, our platform, the technologies that we use, the banking partners that we have, your money couldn't be safer. I think that individuals, one, as if a lot of people were in Silicon Valley Bank or banks that might be impacted by this news, there's certainly a flight to safety. And I think on one end, Atmos can be viewed as a product that is not quite as safe because we've not been around for 100, 200 years, like some of the other banks out there. But of course, that's not true. Our technologies create a banking system where our customers' money is just as safe as if they were banking at Chase or Silicon Valley Bank or any of the other banks. Many customers that have banked at SVB, they've been made whole and will be made whole, by the government. And these entities, when they fail, the government does have a tendency to step in to ensure that people's money is not at risk. So I don't think that people should be too worried about their money, whether it's with one institution or the other. From a safety perspective, I think, again, customers have the ability to really lean on and leverage their dollars to create a more positive world, a better tomorrow. And I think that's what we should all be doing. And of course, customers should ensure that their deposits are FDIC insured. I think there are a number of products out there that do put money at risk. Of course, Atmos is not one of those. And I hope that more and more customers will start to recognize that and see that, and ensure that their deposits are being used in a way that not only is really safe for them, but then also provides that sense of return that they want with a strong yield, and then maximum impact. I think those three things are incredibly important. Where a customer does not need to sacrifice on technology, they shouldn't sacrifice on safety, they shouldn't sacrifice on yield, but they should also get the maximum amount of impact that they want to create in the world. And I think that we're at a time in history and technology in which that is absolutely doable, and people can get all of these things. They just need to be willing to take a couple of minutes and start to open up accounts and see what is out there. If it's not with Atmos, there are other entities out there that are doing good jobs too. And I think that the power of our deposits, the power of our money, what we're doing, how we interact with the world, are all something that we should be leaning on as much as possible, because there's certainly no time like today in order to make this impact that we want.
Come back next time to get clued into the latest in the world of conscious consumerism.